Good morning, everyone. Welcome to this Ask an Author event that is being organised by Book Links for the Australia Reads campaign. I acknowledge the traditional owners of the land where we meet today and recognise that this land has always been under their custodianship. I am on the land of the Jagera, Yagara and Yuggera people. That's a really hard one. I invite you to write in the chat room the country you are on. I pay my respects to elders past and present. As well as adding what country you're on, you might also like to type into the chat room what school you're at and what state you're in, because I think we have a few interstate people on today. So today we have 3 award-winning authors to chat with you, and you can ask them questions by typing in the chat room. And I'm now going to hand over to Emma MacTaggart, who's going to be your host for today.
Good morning, everyone. It is so lovely to be joining you today, and it's lovely to see those wonderful sea of faces from the students that are joining us today. It is very exciting to be bringing to you James Moloney, Michael Gerard Bauer and Jackie French, who have been all primed up. They're very nervous though, children, so be nice to them. But they're all very much looking forward to answering your questions. It's really nice to have Riverside Distance Ed, Buderim, people from Buderim, from Amberley District State School, from St John Vianney's School in Manly. So keep putting the names of the schools in, and we are very much looking forward to spending this lovely hour with you. I think that, Jenny, I think we could pretty much roll to the first question.
Okay.
And while Jenny's getting that going, we're also from Bald Hills, Hillcrest Christian College in Victoria. Hi down there. We're missing you up here in Queensland. Don't let anyone say otherwise.
Hi, Anthony. My question is, what do you enjoy most about being an author?
So I will repeat that back. Thank you, Jamie, from Middleridge State School. Perhaps, James, if we start with you, what is it that you actually enjoy the most about being an author?
I like to be completely in charge of the story I'm writing. I can make it up, make everything up. I don't have to stick to reality. I don't have to check with too many other people about how things are going. Although I have had the odd argument with people called editors. That might be another question to answer. But no, I think the short answer to that question is I like being in charge of everything I'm doing and having it all down to me.
And Jackie, do you feel the same way? Do you enjoy just being completely in charge, or do you find your wombats take over?
No, I find in fact the editors give actually, I rather enjoy the process of being edited, but I love the fact that I get paid to daydream. In fact, I not only get paid to daydream, I get paid to make my daydreams as good and powerful as I possibly can. Then I put them down. But the other lovely thing about being an author is you can write exactly the book you feel like daydreaming. If you love football, write about football. If you love pizza, write about pizzas. If you love zombies, write about zombies or zombie football or zombie pizzas. And you are the boss of the book, which is probably actually pretty much the same answer as James.
This is pretty good, kids, to be the boss of the book, don't you think? Michael Gerard Bauer, what about you? What is it that you most enjoy about being an author?
Well, I agree with those 2 answers. One of the things I really enjoy is discovering the story. James talked about being in charge there, and sometimes when you're trying to write a story, you don't know if you are in charge. The story takes you to all different places, I think. So I like the idea of getting a little story idea, or all my stories start with really tiny things, and then trying to tease out and discover and find where the story is by, asking questions and wondering and using your imagination. And I just think it's amazing that you can, catch stories from very tiny little bits of things that interest you. And I also love it as being an author when someone reads your finished story and actually relates to it or finds something of themselves in it.
Thank you, Michael. We've got another question that's come in from Amelia. Jackie, I think it's from you, unless unless the gentlemen have also got wombats in their back pockets as well.
Hi, my name is Amelia. I would like to ask a question and to Jackie French. Do you like writing books about wombats?
Probably fairly obviously yes, as somehow or other, the wombats tend to sneak into my books. Look, never underestimate a wombat. I keep thinking I'm writing a completely wombat-free book, even one about the Battle of Waterloo, and still somehow a wombat snuck in somewhere. So there are very few of my books where the wombats, yes, don't decide it is time for a wombat.
Thank you, Jackie. We've got another question that's been submitted by Emma, and I think, James, we'll kick it to you after you hear this one.
Hi, I'm Emerson. My question is for all the authors. What inspired you to be an author?
Thank you, Emma, from Middleridge State School. So how did this all start for you, James? What inspired you?
I think I've been making up stories in my head since I was Emma's age, and they just stayed in my head. I wasn't a person to act these things out in front of anybody else, but I'm also one of those people, I would go down into the backyard after school, and without anyone else around, I would act out stories. I was very lucky. I had teachers who read stories to me at school, particularly in primary school, and some of them were so interesting and I got so involved in them that my imagination was sparked, and I would go out into the backyard and make up additional adventures or reenact in my head the adventures that were going on in a book that the teacher was reading to us at that time. And I think if you're that kind of person, if you've got young people listening to this broadcast now, and you're the kind of person who lives in your own imagination and has those kinds of games just for fun in the backyard where it's really just you, then I think there's a good chance you might be an author in the making. So yeah, I think it's not a very long step from making up those stories in your head in the backyard when you're 7 or 8 or 9 years old, and one day writing a story.
And Michael, did you start the same way by indulging that daydream in the backyard?
I had plenty of made-up stories in the backyard, certainly. And I think one of the things when I got older, I sort of wanted to be an author. I love stories, and I just really love words as well. And I sort of fell in love with the power of words. And when I was like a early teenager, my desire as a writer was to be a singer-songwriter. That's what I wanted to be. I wanted to write songs. But I discovered that tragically, in order to be a singer-songwriter, you have to be able to sing and write songs. And I couldn't do that very well. And then my love of words sort of went more into stories and imagination and progress from that. But certainly, I spent a lot of time in the backyard pretending I was a secret agent, pretending I was all sorts of things.
And Jackie, the daydreamer, was that how you started, or was it also the love of the power of the word?
Both. I was telling people stories, the little boy next door stories about the sparrows, adventures about the sparrows, or the shadow men who live under your bed and creep out and suck out your essence at 2 a.m. The little boy next door had nightmares, and I was told I wasn't allowed to play with the little boy next door until I stopped telling stories. But luckily he moved away soon afterwards, which may not have been coincidence. I wrote my first book at 6 because I was really bored and had run out of books to read. The headmistress had a copy printed off for all the kids in the school, and I was allowed to tell stories to the class for the last 20 minutes of each day if they'd behaved themselves. But everyone said, no, dear, you can't make a living being a writer. Do something else. So it wasn't until much later when I needed the money to register my car and I had a wombat to help me get published. But that's actually a much, much longer story.
Jackie, thank you so much.
Hi, my name is John. My question is for all the authors. How did you experience being an author?
That's what we just had.
No, that's a new one. So
Yeah.
I think that Jai, thank you, Jai from Middle Ridge. I think that he is actually talking about the actual working day of the author, perhaps, because we've talked about the inspiration. So Jackie, other than, you know, having to feed those wombats that keep, you know, nudging at your door looking for attention, what does your working day and the actual daily experience of an author look like for you?
First of all, I never think I'm going to write a book today. It would be too terrifying. Every day I work out exactly one scene I'm going to write. And then if I'm lucky, 10 days later, I realize it's a book. But again, even though I've planned it out absolutely exactly, it never happens like that. It doesn't work properly unless you actually have planned it. But if you've planned it properly, somewhere in that first half hour, the characters will take over and they'll gallop off and they'll drag you with them, and it is always an adventure.
And Michael, as you're working each day, do you plan, or do you just get taken along by the story as well?
I do plan, but all authors, I think, work in different ways, and some people do much more sort of writing down planning. If I get an idea for a story, I think about it for a long time, for maybe months in my head, until it grows sort of a bigger story in my head. I never sit down and start to write a story until I've got an ending in my head that I really like. I don't know the whole story, but I've got an ending that I really want to write. And then if I've got the courage, it takes me a bit of courage to sit down and actually write the first words and then try to discover and find the rest of the story. If I'm in a sort of a good role with my writing, I often start the day with a long walk. And I find that doing a long walk, the same walk every day, and thinking about a scene or thinking about the story, I always come back with ideas. I always come back with problems solved. And I never try to sit down in front of the computer without, as Jackie said, I think there, without having something that you know you're going to try to write. Never sit down in front of a screen with nothing in my head. I think that's a disaster.
So page fright.
Yes.
James, does that strike you, or, you know, like, is it hard work actually being a writer?
Oh, absolutely. It is hard work, I'm afraid. But you get so much from it. That's why you go and do that hard work. Page fright, yes. I like to have the stories planned out so that I never really hit that moment in writing a story where I don't really know what's happening next. I'm also like Michael. I have a bit of a rule with myself. I don't let myself start a story until I know how it's going to end, because then I've got a direction to go to. But there's something I wanted to say in this answer to this question about how do you experience being an author, that maybe kids would like to think of it this way. Because if you looked at me during my working day, it looked very boring. It looks like being an office job. I have a little cabin type office in my backyard, and I go down there 8 o'clock every morning and start work. You've got to be quite disciplined. But, you know, if you looked in through the door, you would see this man, looks like me, in a pair of football shorts, probably with some paint spatters on, and a T-shirt with holes in, and he'd be hammering away at the keyboard, and you think, oh, that's all a bit boring. But what you wouldn't understand was, actually, in my head, I'm probably holding a sword in my hand and I'm charging into this blazing castle, having dragons burning their fire at me, and I'm having to dodge and weave like it's some sort of video game. And I'm making my way through to whatever aim it is that I have to get into that castle. I'm having the time of my life, and it's happening inside my head. And I have to put that, using words, I have to put that onto the screen.
So the adventures and children, you can see that that Michael and Jackie are both thoroughly agreeing that it looks
Yes.
boring from the outside, but on the inside, being a writer is incredibly exciting. Teachers out there, hi to the Canterbury Girls Secondary College in Melbourne, and Christ the King in Graceville. It's lovely to have you on board as well. Please jump into that chat room and ask questions. If you have any burning questions that are coming from your students, we're very happy to answer them on the fly, and I'll read them out for you. But in the meantime, I mean, Anna, I think it was Annalise, Jenny, that actually had already sent in a question for us.
Okay.
Hi, my name is Annalise. I have a question. Where do you get all your ideas for your books from?
Thank you, Annalise. I think we have gone, writers, you would actually find that this happens a lot, that we keep answering the same questions, but children pitch it differently. I think that Annalise is possibly asking, where does that single idea come from perhaps actually if we just talk to your latest books. James, if we start with you.
Quite often for me, it's just something out of a book I'm reading at the time for my own enjoyment. It might be a book that's really aimed at adults, but there'll be something in it that I can see I can write something for young people. Or it might be in a movie. I like going to the movies, I love movies, and there'll be some scene in that movie and I just think, wow, that was really clever, or that was so moving, or so it really grabbed me. So yes, I can tell you that my latest book was actually for adults and set in Germany during the Second World War. And I started thinking about that book 35 years earlier when I saw a film one Saturday afternoon. There's one particular scene where something happened, and I won't try to say it now. But probably my best known book started on a beach at Rainbow Beach in Queensland, when I saw an overweight boy come down onto the beach, looking around, obviously had no friends. He wasn't much to look at. He looked very lonely and unhappy. And I just wondered, where's his family? Why is he so unhappy? Who goes to the beach on their own when you're 15 years old? You know, and I started to think about him and his life, and it turned into a book called A Bridge to Wiseman's Cove, all from that one moment on the beach.
Wow. And Michael, do you know, like when you pick one quirky moment that actually created a book for you, something equally as odd that then turned into words on paper?
Yeah, well, just in general, first, I obviously agree with James. I think, you know, anything can be the beginning of a story, and it's anything that happens, I think, that gets you asking questions, like the questions James was asking about that boy on the beach. It gets you curious about it. And sometimes it can be a movie, and sometimes it can be a poster, and sometimes it can be, you know, something that someone said. And for me, sometimes it's been a little tiny childhood memory. When I wrote the Don't Call Me Ishmael series, it was because of this picture that was on my wall, which is a still image from the movie Moby Dick. And I had that on my wall. I wasn't thinking about writing a book, but I know this book because I studied it at uni. And I knew that the first line of this very famous Herman Melville epic was Call Me Ishmael. And for some reason, when I looked at that poster, I was thinking about that as an opening sentence, Call Me Ishmael. And for some reason in my head, I imagined someone just saying the opposite of that, Don't Call Me Ishmael. And that was it. I'd started to ask questions. I thought to myself, I wonder why, if the person is called Ishmael, why they don't like that name. And I like it. Why don't they like it? And how did they get called Ishmael, and who are they? And it grows into, well, it grew into 3 books. And if I don't have that poster on my wall and I don't think that one tiny thought, those 3 books don't get written. And it can be anything that you stumble into as you go through your day, something someone says to you, you know, some object that you see that somehow gets you asking questions. And that's the key thing. It gets you asking questions, you make up answers, that creates more questions. And like a jigsaw puzzle, piece by piece, maybe if you're lucky, a story with a complete picture, you know, forms.
Jackie, we've got a question that is going to come straight back to that about putting those puzzles together, because Mia from St. Paul's asked, you know, what was the process for editing a chapter book, which is sorting out all of those puzzles. But just, I mean, if it wasn't a wombat, what would be the one quirky moment where an idea for a story came to you?
There's not one. Look, every author I've ever met is interesting. Every author I've ever met is interested in a whole range of things and keeps asking questions and questions and questions about really peculiar things that they suddenly get interested in. And then there is a moment, I call it a ping moment, where you don't get the idea gets you. It grabs you by the back of the neck, and it won't get go until you've actually written the book. So as both people were saying, it's not so much that you get ideas from everywhere. It's the fact that writers are the kind of people who are interested in all sorts of things. And suddenly you realize that is where a book is. And unfortunately, my most recent book is actually a wombat book, The Fire Wombat. But that is actually a totally true one. In the middle of the bushfires, 2 a.m., Ember Watch, the fires all around me, this small starving wombat crept out of the smoke. But that's actually rather unusual that I get an idea like that. But on the other hand, if I hadn't been interested in wombats for decades, if I hadn't been interested in 90 million things like every single other author. And by the way, yes, we authors are probably the most boring people on earth when we work, because we just work inside our own heads. But every author I've met is just fascinating to talk to, if it's on something like exactly what kind of saber do pirates use, or do they wear shoes, or Georgian silverware. Every author has got the most peculiar interests.
And thinking of those peculiar interests, just to wrap up the, where do ideas come from? James, Ruben has asked you particularly, where did you get the idea for the Young Viking, for the Young Vikings book?
Okay. Well, back when I was probably Ruben's age, I would have been maybe 8, 9, 10 years old. There was a television show on called The Vikings. And it was on, probably about 4 o'clock, 4:30, just right time for me to come home from school and I could watch it. So I loved the characters. I watched every episode, and I've already mentioned how I would then go down into the backyard and extend out stories in my head. So in that particular case, I made myself a Viking sword, and I used a garbage tin lid. Round metal garbage tin lid became my Viking shield, and I think I even had made myself a bit of a helmet out of cardboard and things like that. And I would charge around mimicking dialogue and actions out of those things. So I've loved Vikings all of that time. They're fascinating people. They're very violent people, I suppose. But you don't have to quite have the books full of quite so much. They're also very interesting people, very brave, the way they travelled across the oceans. So, I suppose a lifelong interest in Vikings sparked from when I was in primary school.
So always keep those notebooks, children. Anything that's happening now could be a story that your children's children will read in the future. Thank you for that. Jenny, I think we've got another video question that's come in for Michael.
Hi, I'm Ashley from Roma State School. Mr. Moloney, have you ever dyed your hair blue, like the grandma in Blue Hair Day? Mr. Bauer, have you had a problem with drug turkeys in your yard?
That's a good start from Wairema State School. So Mr. Moloney, have you ever dyed your hair blue?
Fortunately, no, I haven't. Yes, it seems to have gone white on me suddenly, though. But I will tell you this, that one of the things that led to me writing Blue Hair Day was when my daughter Julia, who is now all grown up, when she was about maybe 5 or 6, she liked to paint things. And so instead of buying paint for all the time, because she used to go through quite a bit, we got food dye out of the cupboard, and my wife would make up, yellow, a jar of yellow, a jar of blue, and a lot of red. And of course, my lovely Julia is a little bit uncoordinated at times, and she would spill these jars, and then she would put her hands in them. And one day she ended up with blue hands that were stained blue for 3 or 4 days. And that sort of, I realised how food dye can, it really hangs around. So I thought instead of hands, I would make it grandma's hair.
And I think that would be much reasonable to the mothers out there, perhaps. And Mr. Bauer, to you, back to those scrubbed turkeys.
I absolutely did have scrub turkeys in my backyard. That whole story is based on on a real life experience. We had a yard with a beautiful patch of lawn in the middle and chipbark gardens all the way around it. One morning I came down and all our chipbark was scraped all over the lawn. I spent the next hour and a half trying to rake chipbark from grass. It's a very difficult thing to do. Raked it back into the gardens. Next morning I got up, all the chipbark was back on there again. And it seemed like that those scrub turkeys were doing it on purpose. And we tried various things, maybe not quite as exaggerated as some of the things the dad in U Turkeys does, but we did try various things to try to encourage the scrub turkeys to go into our neighbour's yard rather than our yard. But they kept coming back. Eventually they went somewhere else, I think, and built their nest. But I had to sort of, tell my wife occasionally that they're native animals and they're protected. So maybe, no, don't do that.
As a group of daughters, you're looking very, very dangerous for your neighbours. Jackie's terrifying hers. You're sending wild animals into your next door neighbours. Maybe a tamer question from Lila next, Jenny, I think, which is one for Jackie.
Hi, I'm Lila from Moloney School. Ms. French, what inspired you to write Tom Appleby, Convict Boy? Do you have any names that were convicts in history? 3.
Thank you, Lila. Jackie, could you hear that question? It was, what inspired you to write Tom Appleby, Convict Boy, and have you had any relatives that were convicts in your family history?
I had at least 2 ancestors who were convicts, though one of them was proved not guilty a year after he got here, but he sent them a very rude letter back. In fact, I won't even say what he said in his rude letter back, and he ended up staying in Australia rather than going back to Wales. But that came, in fact, from an ancestor who was not a convict. My great-great-great something grandmother's diary, who came out here in the 1790s. She was one of Australia's first free settlers, and she kept a diary from the week after she was married. And I read the diary, and I knew the history in the books I was given at school was wrong. And unfortunately, you're not very popular way back in 1950s and 60s when you keep putting your hand up and saying, no, miss, that's wrong. No, the history book's wrong, miss. No, that didn't happen. That didn't happen. So I always knew that I would write a book like that. And so many of my books are where, in fact, the history books are wrong. Or like Pirate Boy of Sydney Town, they've left out something really important, like we were a pirate town, or we were a pirate colony. So I always knew I'd write it, but I needed to have the skill to be able to do it properly. And that took me about 40 years to actually work out how to communicate the fact that they didn't starve. They were terrified of starving, and all of the other things that the history books had got wrong.
Thank you, Jackie. The historical research that you did, there's a question from Amberley District State School as well about that historical research. Did you dive in as deeply with a waltz for Matilda as well?
Yes, a waltz for Matilda basically was researched my entire life. I grew up in a family. I was brought up for the first 4 years by great-grandma, and she told me stories that her great-grandmother had told me and her great-grandmother had told me. So I'm the inheritor of hundreds or possibly thousands of years of women's stories, of Dad reading me poems at night, like The Highwayman and The Love of Words. So I grew up with history. I grew up with diaries and letters and old newspapers and primary sources. Rather than living in a little box in the present, I always had this extraordinary adventure of the past all around me in the stories I was told. And thanks to Dad, I also had the beauty of words in poetry and songs. And Dad had the most wonderful dramatic voice for telling poems. And the combination, I think, of great-grandma and Dad produced me as a writer. Oh, add to that, my grandmother sending me every book shortlisted by the Children's Book Council. And that's probably the end result.
It certainly is, you know, for the first half an hour that we've actually talked about it, it's a collision of your daydreams meets your past, meets the research, meets the ideas. And just a quick hands up that the Amberley District State School, again, have just asked for everyone, you know, hands up to the writers. Did you enjoy writing while you were at primary school?
Ooh, yeah, yeah.
Maybe not. That's okay. We won't.
Definitely. Look, for me, I was dyslexic. No one can read my handwriting, including me. Arithmetic, I would get my numbers mixed up. But because I could tell stories, no one thought I was stupid. Back then, if you were dyslexic, if you had problems, you just picked up papers in the schoolyard till it was time to leave school. So for me, the fact that I could tell stories actually saved me. I don't know what would have happened to me if I couldn't. And
I've got a question for you following this, Michael. But so you're not quite convinced that you were writing as in primary school.
I just don't remember writing any stories in primary school. I don't hardly remember writing any stories at school at all, at any stage. We didn't do much creative writing or writing of stories, and I certainly didn't ever at school up till senior ever go home and write a story just for myself. It's just something I didn't do and didn't want to do until later, until university actually. So it's just something that I didn't do, even though I love stories. I didn't make up my own stories, only in my head. I didn't think that maybe I could write them down. Also, I didn't have much confidence in myself, so I certainly wouldn't be telling other people's stories. So it came a bit later for me. Yeah.
And Michael, just while we have you, you know, you talked about the idea for Don't Call Me Ishmael coming from the poster. The students at St Andrews Lutheran College were really curious about that book of yours particularly. And their number one question was, what is the most important message that you would like, you know, being in control, that you would like your readers to walk away with, having read Don't Call Me Ishmael?
Hi, St Andrews. That's a really tough question. I guess any author would say you never sort of set out, you know, to write a message, but certainly your thoughts and your values and your feelings, you know, come through a story you create. And for me, but Don't Call Me Ishmael and the Ishmael series, I think the feeling I get from that is about people being themselves and having the courage to be themselves, and also having the courage and the willingness to let other people be who they are. That's what sort of comes through that story to me. It's a story about friendship. It's a story about, you know, people supporting each other, and about learning to be happy and proud of who you are.
And James, from the books that you've read, you know, that again, we've talked about the ideas, you know, ideas collide, meet maturity, skills come up. There is that serious side of the writer, isn't there, about the messages that we actually would like readers to walk away with?
Yeah, my hope is that my readers will look at characters whom I've made up based on my observations and my thinking about people, will view those characters as though they're real human beings and see what we might call the humanity of what's inside them. I'd hope that my readers go along, sort of experience the difficulties that I make my characters have to face and overcome. So yeah, I'm with Michael and Jackie, I think would agree completely. Authors like us don't set out to write books that have a message, a strong message in them. I think it makes your book a lesser book if that's your only aim. Your first job is to tell a riveting story about characters that your readers really care about. And I think if we achieve that, then maybe that is the message that we've been trying to get across.
Well, thank you for that. There's a couple of schools. Yes. Sorry, Jackie. A couple of schools. So Wairema State School, and then I have to go back to ask another one. They've asked particularly, individually, so starting with you, Jackie, what has been your most favourite book to actually write?
Yes, excuse me for saying yes before. I was just so in agreement with everything that James was saying, that yes, it spontaneously came out. A Waltz for Matilda. It's the first in the Matilda saga, and it really is a love story to the land and to the people and everyone I've met. It's a book which has really got my whole life and everything I love in it.
It was that was from Emma Barnes, was also asking the same question. Michael, to you, which is the book that you love writing the most, that you're the most proud of?
It's a really tough question. You get asked that when you go and visit schools, and I always feel hesitant about sort of picking one book out, because it feels like you're saying the other ones aren't your favourites as well, or they aren't quite as good. And I think whenever you finish a book, all the work it takes to get a book written, you never write anything that you're not proud of and happy with at the end. But if I had to pick a book from mine, and I haven't got anywhere near as many to pick from as James and Jackie have, but I would pick the Ishmael series. Those 3 books I'm most proud of, because I think I like the feeling in the book, and I like the way the characters develop over 4 years at high school, and I like the way it ends. That's been my favourite.
And James, to you?
Oh, many of my books are quite serious in nature. So when I lighted upon an idea about this teenage girl, it was just a romp through the life of a teenage girl, and I would write it through her voice in the first person, pretending I was this teenage girl who's part of her relatives are dodgy. They're sort of mixed up in crime, but they're not very good at it, so they keep ending up going to jail and things like that. The book's called Black Taxi, and sometimes you can tell you're enjoying a book because you just you end up writing more words per day than you normally do. And I was sometimes writing, I do a bit of a word count at the end of each day, and I was writing double the number of words when I was writing this book. But I suppose the thing that tells me I was having the most amount of fun was the fact that if you're sitting in a room all by yourself, hammering away at the keyboard and laughing your head off, then you're either writing a good book or you're crazy.
Well, let's just assume that you're not crazy. I'm loving that Jackie, that you and Michael are laughing out loud at the set, because obviously you've very much been in exactly the same scenario where you're enjoying the book and really loving the process, which is really wonderful. The children at Christ the King Primary School have asked a couple of questions, but it kind of leads to this, when you've got so many words that you've enjoyed writing, what happens when you've got too many words? So how long does it take for a book to be edited? And I don't know if they're actually writing a joke, but how many editors does it take to edit a book? So, so Michael, if we come to that, there's no light bulbs in there, but that process of having too many words or not enough words, what's the editing process like for you?
I like it. I like it. I remember the Running Man was my first book, and I'd never obviously had a book edited, so I didn't know what it would be like to receive a manuscript back where someone had gone through it and written detailed comments and suggestions. And I always say I learned more about writing in that process than anything else that had happened to me. Someone looking carefully at the story and looking at the structure and looking at my words and how I wrote and offering advice and suggestions. I always think that, when you write the book as the best you can, and you rewrite it and eventually you send it in, and hopefully the publisher likes it. And I think when it goes through the editing process, I always think in my mind, it's going to be 10, 15% better book after we go through this process. And I've had the same editor for every single book, Celia Jellett, and she's been absolutely brilliant. So it's always important, I think, also to have a great working relationship with your editor, so that you can, I always think of it as our book when I'm working with an editor, that we've got the same purpose in mind to try to make it the best book it can be. And that's what Celia said to me from the very first book, that her job was to try to make it the best book it could possibly be.
And Jackie, St. Paul's School have asked a similar kind of question, what is the process for editing a book? Michael just alluded to leaving your ego behind and actually letting people help you actually create the best that you can create. Is that, have you had a similar experience with a long-term relationship with editors, or what's the process like for you?
I've worked with Lisa Berryman now for more than 2 decades. I send a book to Lisa and she says, I absolutely adore it. It's just a book, I think the ending needs to be changed. And I do that. And then it goes to Kate and she says, oh, look, I absolutely love it. It says you really need to change the beginning. And then it goes to the copy editor who says, oh, look, it's a wonderful book. You realise, though, that there's a problem with the middle, that actually it all happens on the Tuesday, and so you rewrite the middle. And in fact, every one of those is wonderful, but you do learn to be really wary, because the more they say they absolutely adore the book to begin with, it means the more you're actually going to have to change it.
Wow, that's so. I don't know how to respond to that. You know, because the first thing you want to hear when you share your book, and James, I'm curious if this happens to you, is that you want people to love it because you're finally giving that piece of you to someone, and yet, Jackie, you're saying that if they love it, you haven't done the best job. So, James, how do you feel?
No. They genuinely love it, but it just genuinely needs to be changed.
I agree with everything Michael and Jackie have said about editing. You couldn't do without them. They make your book better. Yes, with Jackie, they always start off by saying it's a great book, I love it. And I always just rush through that because I'm waiting for the but. Yeah, because you know there's more work. And you accept that. Tell you what, the second book I ever wrote, my editor was a very, very experienced woman. It edited some of the most famous children's writers in the world. And she said, there's one particular section here in this book, James. I've done a bit of a word count. It's about 3,000 words long. Look, it's just too many words. You need to get through it quicker. It's a very important scene, but it needs to go faster. She said, I want you to come back to me with the same scene in 1,500 words. So in the second book I've ever written, how am I going to do this? I thought I'd trick her here. So I rewrote the scene in about 2,300 words or something like that. And I took it back to her and she said, no, I said 1,500. You know, you haven't. So it took me about 3 or 4 goes. And in the end, I've done that scene. It's in the book now. That section is about 1,500 words long from originally being 3,000. And it is just right. The pace is perfect. She knew exactly what she was doing. And that was my second book. And I knew from that moment on to trust the editor. Yeah. Yeah.
Wow. And that trust process, so, you know, to have that established that so early in your career too, the trust, I'm really curious where the trust of the other people comes from. And I'm going to challenge the 3 of you with a rapid fire response. Amberley's District State School have asked, what jobs did you have before you were an author? So, Jackie, Michael, James, just tell us the five jobs you had before as an author, because then we've got another clanger from a really good question from St Andrews Lutheran College.
Farmer, cook, echidna milker, sugar packer, chambermaid, worker at the Anthropology Museum in Queensland and for a private detective agency.
Brilliant. James, so Michael, to you?
Teacher, person who puts leaflets into newspapers, leaflet deliverer, worked at a pineapple cannery, and I worked at a target range at a shooting club. Very dangerous job if you're not good at it.
Wow. And James, what about you?
I sold what's called art union tickets, which is like raffle tickets on the streets of Brisbane. I worked at the fruit market in Brisbane. I had to be there at 4:45 in the morning. What else did I do? Then I became a teacher, a very poor one for a couple of years. Then I became a halfway decent teacher librarian, which I really enjoyed, and I did that for quite a long time. And it was while I was doing that I started writing, and sort of eventually I was able to give up one and just stick with the other.
And thank goodness that all the children...
James and I first met when he was a teacher librarian in a primary school and I was teaching in the secondary school.
Yeah, we're both teaching in the same school. Yeah, strange.
And I'm sure that the children will agree that writing is now your full-time job and that no one's Mind you, milking echidna sounds pretty cool. I think that sounds great. The St Andrews Lutheran College have asked it, so this is going to just take a little bit more thinking rather than a rapid fire. So if you could be one of the characters from one of your books, which character would you choose and why? Who's game to go first?
But, I thought immediately, I thought I'd like to be a character called Hawk in my story, The Young Vikings, because he's a brave young man. He discovers his father's been murdered, and he has to take over the responsibility for his family. And yeah, there's a lot of courage there. I enjoyed being him in the same way that I mentioned earlier, that in my imagination, I could see myself with the sword in the hand charging in. So I think I really enjoyed that character, and I really like to be him. Yeah.
Michael?
I think I'd be Ishmael, because he's most like me. He was terrified of speaking in public when he was at school, and I was absolutely terrified of speaking in front of people. Plus, he's got some really fantastic and weird, bizarre friends, which I think would be a lot of fun. And he also has this sort of unrequited love, but his story ends up much more successfully than a lot of mine did at school. So I think I'll be Ishmael, I think.
And Jackie?
I think I'm already there in most of the books. I'm Matilda, I'm Mrs. Puddleham, I'm the heroine of The Schoolmaster's Daughter. I'm only a little bit of them, but that's all I would ever want to be, is just a little bit of all of them, probably including some of the wombats.
Well, we don't have any carrots for you, Jackie, I'm sorry, but we do have a lovely question for you, particularly from Wairema State School. And gentlemen, I will ask you the question as well, but starting with you, Jackie, do the authors think of the illustrations for a book, or do the books get sent to the illustrator by a third party, and who decides that?
I always think exactly of the illustrations. Then I send it to the editor, and the editor chooses the illustrator, and that's the absolute adventure and the joy of it, because it is completely, utterly, totally different. And it's always this thrill where you see what you have created, and then what the illustrator creates, and then what the designer creates, and what the editors actually see in the book. And it's a team. 5 or 6 people come together, and you don't just have one person's work, you've got a whole team's work, creating something that not one of you could have done, but 6 of you can together. And even though I wrote most of my books myself, it's that teamwork, which is one of the most thrilling parts of being an author.
And gentlemen, when it comes to illustrators working, like even if it's cover design, have you ever had an input, or are you handing over the project at that point?
I'm absolutely useless on the visual side. Ask me to do anything in words, make up the story, the structure, the whole, that's fine. But no, I had no talent at all. If I try to take a photograph, later when you look at it, it'll have a tree sticking out of someone's head. Or something horrible in the back, a garbage bin in the background. If I try to draw something, I can't even do stick figures. I'm sure there's a file somewhere at some of my early publishers that has got my early attempts at what I thought something might look like, and they get it out every Christmas to laugh at it. So no, I really do enjoy, I look forward to what cover designers come up with, and illustrators for those few books that I've had that have had an illustrator with them. Yeah.
And Michael?
I'm terrible with book covers. Sometimes in the past they've sent up like 4 versions of a possible book cover, and I can never make up my mind about which one is the one that I like the best or why I like it. And the only time I did pick one book cover over another one, they went for the one that I didn't pick. So, I've been lucky to be, have an illustrator with, Rodney Losers with Chrissy Krebs, and she was picked by the Scholastic team to do those illustrations, and I had nothing to do with those. She did a wonderful, fantastic job. She also made stuffed toys for Rodney as well, so she's a fantastic illustrator. And the only other person I've worked with, the illustrator, is my son Joe. Joe Bauer, he did all the illustrations for Eric Bale and the Secret Agent Derek Danger Dale book, and he's a genius. I'll work with him anytime.
He'd be very delighted to hear that from you. Jackie, we've got a really interesting question from St. Paul's, but I want to come back to that one because Ambly have actually asked a really great question, and it's actually not about you at all, but it actually is about you all. What books do you love reading from other writers? So this is, you know, so who does a reader read when they're not writing? James, to you.
I read books mostly written for adults like myself, and I read to enjoy them. I read quite slowly actually, and I like to get so immersed in a book that I don't really want it to end. So I might deliberately take 10 days or 2 weeks to read a book that other people chew up in a day or two, because if I find one that I'm really enjoying, I just want to enjoy that experience of reading. So I read some young adult novels and children's books around. I keep my eye on what's doing well and what might be people are praising in reviews and things, but mostly I read for myself, and I hope everyone else does the same, really.
Michael, who are you? Who's beside your bed at the moment? Who's on your bedside table?
China Melville. It's a science fiction-y sort of story, The Kraken, which is a different story than I normally read because I was down in Melbourne and my son-in-law gave it to me to have a go at reading. I read all sorts of things as well. I love reading adult books. Unlike James, I think I'm a slow reader. I actually set myself a target to read 20 books this year, and I probably will just make it because I like to dwell on the stories too, and particularly ones that I enjoy. I do read a lot of young adult books, you know, to see what people are writing, but also because the sort of young adult books that I like, I think they're just great books, and everyone should read them. And you know, one of my favourite authors is Marcus Zurzak, and his book, The Messenger, and his early books of Fighting Reuben Wolf, still probably some of my favourite books, as well as his book for adults as well. So a whole range of books, yeah. Mainly realistic fiction though, I must admit.
And Jackie, what are you reading at the moment?
I've gone on a Connie Willis binge. I tend to read everything an author has written and then move on to another author, and I'll reread my favourites. I'll read it the first time very, very quickly. I read probably at least a book a day. But then I'll go back and read them slowly and read them over and over and over just to enjoy every possible sentence and nuance of it. So Connie Willis, Jodie Taylor, Margaret Atwood, they're mostly adult authors, apart from the ones that I read to my grandkids.
This is a good one from Ambly, everyone, because it's nearly like it's a great way to actually finish it, because if you weren't asking the author, as Booklinks has invited children around the country to do, no one would get the inside running. So starting with you, Michael, what are you currently writing now? So,
Whoa.
I know, how good is that?
I've just there's a sequel to my picture book, Rodney Loses It, which I've just sort of finished editing a little bit and sent in, called Rodney Forgets It. I've written another picture book text, which is about a very small creature, and I'm working on that. I'm also working on a young adult novel, which I was supposed to finish sometime last year, and I still haven't finished it. So I need to get back to it, and it's a serious young adult book set in my home suburb of Ashgrove, like my very first book, The Running Man, was, and maybe a prequel to that story.
James, how about you? What's in the pipeline? It's astounding to hear that there's a number of books. I'd suggest you'd be the same.
I'm afraid not. I'm not writing. I'm not writing anything at the moment. I'm finding that the well has gone dry for me, and I haven't really sat down at my desk for over a year. I'm doing lots of reading. I'm going to see films. I'm looking at the world as it is now, and an idea will come to me. But I mean, it just reached the stage that the last book I wrote, which was for, I thought it was for teenagers, but the publishers decided to publish it for adults. It took a lot out of me. And it's also, I think, one of the best books I've done, and I wonder if I'm just worried that I won't be able to match it again. And so I'm just letting my batteries recharge before I sort of dive in. Michael and Jackie will tell you how hard it is to write a book. It's like climbing a mountain, just a few steps each day. And I don't think you can embark on that process unless you've got full confidence in the story going, that it's a story that should be told and that you can tell it. And at the moment, I'm not feeling that way. For 25 years, maybe 30 years, I've always had a book on the go. And now I don't. It's quite a strange feeling. I'm hoping it comes back to me.
And Jackie, we've only got a couple of minutes left to go. So what projects are you actually working on at the moment? And thank you to you, James. I'm happily in that last book that you wrote, and I won't read it quickly.
It's a new series, The Girl Who Changed the World. It's about times when girls actually have changed the world in the past. I only hope I can actually do it adequately, because by showing young people how young people have changed the world in the past, hopefully it will give you confidence to change the world now and create the future.
Thank you, Jackie. And I think that's is it time for us, Jenny, now? Some of the schools have started going, which has been amazing. So I will just say graciously, I'll hand over to Jenny, but thank you so much for being so open and generous and kind and thoughtful, James and Michael and Jackie. We always knew that you would be, and I'm sure that the children will join me in saying thank you. So everyone can clap and thank you. We can't quite see, we can kind of see some of the schools there.
And
there we are. Thank you.
Yeah, and Emma, I'd like to say thank you so much for doing such a fabulous job. You're the best MC I've had for a long time. Wonderful. I'll find some more work for you.
That could go horribly wrong for everyone.
Authors for giving up their precious time for this. And I hope all the children out there have picked up some ideas of maybe some new books to explore, to read for the reading hour on the 12th of November, and keep reading right through Australia Reads from the 1st to the 12th of November. And there are still more events happening. This is just the first one for schools today. There's something on every day, and you can still go in and book into the other sessions. I'd love to get a few more booked in, especially tomorrow. We've got one on called Children's Choices, where children can come in and say what their favourite books are and recommend to others what they should read for the reading hour. So we'll finish the session here and say thank you to everyone.